Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
This week, one lawmaker accepts a national role working to improve the lives of Indigenous people, and another makes the case for why it's time for a new law allowing medical aid in dying. Plus, Minnesotans are one step closer to a new state flag and seal. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. Senator Mary Kunesh was recently elected to serve as chair of the National Caucus of Native American State Legislators, a group that works to raise the profile of tribal issues in state legislatures and to improve public policy. She joins me now in the studio to talk more about this new opportunity. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So, congratulations are in order, for sure. And those of us around the legislature are aware of a group called the National Conference of State Legislatures, which is always abbreviated to NCSL. It's a nonpartisan organization to support and strengthen state legislatures. The Native American Caucus is a subgroup within the NCSL and has 89 members from 21 states. And this is the group now that you're going to chair. What more can you tell us about it?
Well, it's a great group of Indigenous leaders that, are Democrats, Republicans. They come from a lot of different states with different priorities and leadership. And so when we come together, we talk about the issues that are plaguing our unique states, as well as some of the legislation that has passed, legislation that hasn't passed, and how we can best meet the needs of our Indigenous communities. And it's not just the Indigenous communities of the continental United States. We have Alaska legislators, we have Hawaiian, South Pacific legislators that join in this. So the perspectives, the unique perspectives it's really kind of a cool conversation when we all kind of take a breath and sit down and just start talking about the work that needs to be done and how we're all doing it in our own way.
Because this is a group of Indigenous lawmakers, as you just described, from multiple states, what are some of the large areas of concerns that members are united in tackling and that you will be leading them as the new chair?
I think one of the biggest topics that we spoke about is the need for broadband and internet access, because with or without that, it can make or break a community. Kids can't go to school online if they don't have access to internet. Medical attention isn't accessible, information, and we saw that big change during COVID when they were trying to get out the information about the vaccine or how to handle it or what resources are needed. So broadband is a really big one. Education, of course, especially in reservation areas where there hasn't been the investment in education for really decades or generations. How are we going to get our communities educated in the best way possible? Healthcare issues are always an issue for Indigenous people, so susceptible to diabetes, heart disease, addiction. The opioid situation is across the board a big problem. So there's always these sort of things, and then you throw in like mineral rights and environment and gaming. All of those things really make a difference in those communities. And if I could sort of reorganize it, I would like to kind of create our own little sub-caucuses and committees to address those with those that have that expertise within our caucus.
So you are chair. You are currently chair of the Education Policy Committee in this group.
Finance.
Well, here in the Senate,
yes,
within the caucus,
yes.
you serve on education, so you're speaking about that very knowledgeably.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because you have a background as an educator, and in Minnesota here, you serve as the chair of the Education Finance Committee. And you've sort of touched on this, but from a multi-state perspective, what policy changes still need to be made for education specifically?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of it is our partnership with the federal government when there are federal Indian schools on the reservations to ensure that those dollars that were promised to them are getting to them. And then here in Minnesota, we kind of we have this equalization funding for our Indian schools here. I don't know of any other state that does that. So how can the state work together with the federal government, especially on the reservations, to ensure that those educational opportunities are here? We've been talking a lot about the boarding schools of the past. How are we going to address those boarding school situations, but at the same time ensure that the history that is being taught around our indigenous people from the past to the future is really being addressed in the right way. The funding is always going to be an issue. The curriculum is always going to be an issue. But here in Minnesota, we've worked really hard on language revitalization, and that is a top priority for many, many of our states to ensure that those unique languages aren't lost and that they're lifted up and taught in the schools.
In more and more places in Minnesota and around the globe, land acknowledgements are either printed in programs or spoken aloud before events in an effort to recognize that the land is a homeland for an indigenous group that was displaced due to colonization. In your view, are these acknowledgements important in raising awareness of the historical wrongs that were done to indigenous people?
I think it's a valuable tool to educate people on the traumatic history of our indigenous people. You know, when I talk about my missing and murdered indigenous relatives package, I often ask the groups that I'm speaking at, you know, how many tribes do we have, federally recognized tribes do we have in Minnesota? And 99.9% of the time, people can't even tell me that. So it's a good way to bring that awareness, and hopefully it'll pique people's interest. But I think what's really important that once you make those land acknowledgements, you create some kind of an action plan. So this is the case. Now what are we going to do about that, or what should we do to acknowledge it? And so it can be a really valuable tool depending how you use it.
And what is the answer to that question? How many does Minnesota have?
We have 11 federally recognized tribes, 7 of our Anishinaabe and 4 of our Dakota.
Okay. President Abraham Lincoln established a national Thanksgiving holiday amid the turmoil of the Civil War. The Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian website talks about the first Thanksgiving myth. So having just celebrated this holiday, what perspective do you bring?
Well, it's sort of interesting. In my family, we look back and we use the term Thanksgiving. What are we giving thanks for? We're not giving thanks for the Indians saving and being friends with the Pilgrims. That story is long gone. But in our family, we look at each other and what that brings to each other, the sort of changes that have happened for each one of us in the past year. And I think that's a good way to look at it, like, what can we give thanks for? I mean, when your family grows and you get grandchildren, or you bring a new person into the family, somebody's had a good job, somebody's recovered from an illness, those are the sort of things that we look at and really want to acknowledge within that year, because there are some really, really hard years, and it's hard to thank people. I mean, this year, when we look at what's going on globally, what's going on in the world, sometimes it's really hard to think about anything that you could be thankful for. But you know, we just try to look at the bright side and then how we can build on that. And I hope people are doing the same.
Now, this is a big question and we don't have much time left, but I don't want to skip it. As you and other Native American lawmakers work for a better quality of life for Native people, ultimately, what does success look like, as quickly as you can?
Success looks like we have happy, thriving, healthy communities that are well educated, that are infiltrated in the general population across Minnesota, and we continue to build that Indigenous leadership across Minnesota.
Senator Mary Kunesh, congratulations and thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Ron Latz and members of Jewish advocacy groups called a press conference to condemn the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement.
Israel has the right to defend itself. This is the sentence you keep hearing from supporters of the people of Israel during the past month and a half. What do they mean by this sentence? They mean that Israel has the right to protect and defend all its citizens, whether of Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or any other religious faith, from terrorists to beheaded men, women, and even babies.
Instead of advocating for a peaceful two-state solution, the BDS movement seeks to dismantle Israel and end the right of Jewish self-determination in our ancestral homeland. Although the BDS campaign is largely nonviolent, it has strikingly similar aims to those that we see from terrorist organizations like Hamas, who perpetrated the deadliest massacre of Jewish people on October 7th since the Holocaust, and whose charter also calls for the end of Israel, Zionism, and Jews.
When Senator Warren Limmer and I carried the anti-BDS bill in 2017, we confronted the question of what is BDS and why should we oppose it. That bill, now law, prohibited state contractors from discriminating against Israel or against persons or entities doing business in Israel when making decisions relating to the operation of the vendor's business. There was then, and there still is, a history of demonizing Israel in certain realms of public affairs and of looking for mechanisms to promote the elimination of the State of Israel under the guise of more rational-appearing aims, such as reforming it or improving it or driving it to the bargaining table or simply trying to end the so-called occupation by Israel of ill-gotten land. You don't divest a victim of an attack. You don't boycott because a democratic country is defending its citizens from a terrorist group. You don't punish a country that is the only one in this war that is following the international rules of war. If the same atrocities had happened in the U.S., if right now we had our children and women and innocent victims kidnapped and tortured, and our government needed to defend to make sure our citizens would be safe, would you think our allies would try to weaken us financially in our time of need? Oh, wait. We do have innocent American citizens being held hostage right now by Hamas. Surely we should not promote weakening the only country who has the on-the-ground capacity and resolve, and yes, bargaining chips, to force Hamas to release the Americans.
The people of Oregon voted to approve medical aid in dying in 1994, the first state to do so. Since then, 9 more states and the District of Columbia have followed suit, either by ballot initiative, court action, or law change. Representative Heather Edelson is the author of a bill that would add Minnesota to the list, allowing terminally ill adults who qualify the option to end their suffering. She joins me now in the studio. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Shannon.
Death with dignity, assisted suicide, the right to die, medical aid in dying are different ways of describing the End of Life Act. The bill that you're promoting, the measure would allow qualifying people 18 and older with a terminal diagnosis to request life-ending medication. Why should Minnesota move in this direction?
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's going to be highly debated, I think, this session. We're really going to try to make a push. Families, I'm here as a legislator, as a clinical social worker, but as somebody that is really advocating for families, hearing from them that they want this option for their loved ones. So we're debating it because Minnesotans, if elected officials don't hear from the public, that's where the laws really come from. So families want to have this as an option, and we've seen 10 other states, as you said, plus the District of Columbia pass it, and I think it's a really important discussion to have here this session.
What are the circumstances then under which an individual would be allowed to choose this option if the bill were to become law?
So the circumstances there would have to be, there's 2 consulting physicians, and they would have to have a prognosis where the terminal illness is, the expectation is that they only have about 6 months to live. So, looking at that prognosis, overwhelming when you look at other states and the data, it's usually people that have cancer are the overwhelming numbers. I think it's 70% of the people that use this. 90% if you look in other states, 90% of people are in hospice care at that point. So this is one of the options as you've probably already exhausted every other option. Most people, I think it's really important to remember, most people want to live. These are people that are actively dying. And so I think that's just something to really consider when we're having this debate.
Well, and I think it says in the bill that the person has to be able to self-administer the medication. So if it is someone then that is in hospice and has become too weak, or if it is someone with a disability that would somehow prevent them from being able to ingest the medication, then those people would not be allowed this option. Is that correct?
Well, so yes, there's a lot of, we're really working on right now the finalization of the language to make sure that we have as many protections as possible. We're engaging with the disability community, we're engaging with physician groups, really trying to make sure that we have the strongest bill possible for Minnesota. And if you look across the 10 states in the District of Columbia that have passed it, they all have slightly different versions. So what we want to make sure is that we have strong protections for people. So you, in our current draft right now, that you would be able to have somebody help you get the medicine ready, but the person would have to self-administer it. And so, yes, as of right now, if you cannot, say, put it in your IV, or if you cannot swallow the medication, then you would not be able to take this. There's also protections if the person doesn't have the cognitive capacity to understand what they're requesting. And meeting with two physicians is very intentional, making sure the person understands what they are asking, that they've exhausted other options. So this isn't the first line of treatment.
Yeah, it's further down the road. Earlier I mentioned that this process is sometimes referred to as assisted suicide, but I've also read numerous objections to that characterization. Why is suicide the wrong word to use?
You know, we've been having a lot of discussions around that. As somebody that has worked as a therapist, when a person is suicidal, there are a lot of different factors that are happening. That person is usually not actively dying, though we have heard in other states where, you know, you don't have this option, people become suicidal because of the pain. And so the difference here is one person is faced with this terminal illness. They want to live. People go through chemo, which can be very hard on your body. They go through these life-saving options because they want to live. It's not suicide at the end of life. I mean, when you think about this, what we're proposing here, it is an option for families. It is an option for the person that is really seeking to have, you know, there's three things that people want at the end of their life, usually, and it's usually peace. They want to be surrounded by loved ones, and they want to ensure that they've really tried all things to live. And that's really what this bill is allowing you to do, is have some control over the end of your life.
Doctors do sometimes get prognoses wrong, and a 6-month diagnosis may not be accurate. Certainly there are anecdotal stories about people living well beyond a 6-month diagnosis. There's also many faith groups that are opposed to any kind of intervention at the end of life. So how do you reconcile these concerns?
Well, we've really made this, it's patient driven, so the patient gets to decide whether or not they want to participate. So if you're somebody that it doesn't match up with your religious or your values, your beliefs in that way, then you absolutely would not be somebody that would seek it. If you were a practitioner that says my values and my religious beliefs do not match up with this, you do not have to participate. So we make it very clear in the legislation that there is no punitive nor liability for the practitioner to participate, or actually even the institution. So if there's a larger clinic that says, you know, hey, we don't want to do this, or if it's a hospice that does not want to participate, they do not have to. There's no, it's not mandated to do this.
So a patient, if they are, say, in their healthcare provider, this is a choice that they want to make, they've reached the end of the line, their healthcare provider believes strongly that they don't want to participate in this, then that person would then have to, you know, shop around for somebody else that they could work with to go in this direction.
Yes, yeah, and so that can be, I mean, that's going to be something that the patient could face is obstacles to try to figure out what would be a practitioner that would be able to help. Mm-hmm.
The attending provider must determine, and you referred to this, that an individual's request is not arising from coercion or undue influence, and also that individual's mental state is evaluated to make sure that they are of sound mind, and it is really truly their choice. But there are concerns also that healthcare facilities might encourage this option due to financial concerns. I mean, the cost at the end of life can be enormous, and if it's someone who doesn't have a lot of resources, what kind of protections will there be to ensure that this is 100% an individual's choice and it isn't family or financial or some other outside force trying to manipulate the situation?
That is such a great question, Shannon, and we're really making sure that the language is very clear, that it has to be the patient's choice. There can be no coercion, whether it's an insurance company or a larger clinic or a hospital setting or a hospice, to promote this for the patient. That should not be the case. It should be patient-driven, that it's something they want to see for themselves as an option for their end of life.
And so then on the death certificate, will it be clear that this was not suicide? What will be the cause of death on a death certificate?
The cause of death will be the underlying cause of death, which is, so say for instance, if it's pancreatic cancer, it would be pancreatic cancer. But that, you think about that, and I know there's some pushback there, but in the 11 other jurisdictions, this is true. But also think about this. When you're going through, say, you're having cancer and you decide to stop eating, and the VSED, voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. So you stop. At that point, we don't say that is suicide. We say the underlying cause of death. If it's pancreatic cancer, is pancreatic cancer. So I guess, what is the difference?
This is much discussion to come on this very important topic. And Representative Edelson, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Shannon.
The State Emblems Redesign Commission met recently at the Minnesota Senate building to display the thousands of entries for a new state flag and a new state seal. Members whittled down those thousands of entries to 6 flag finalists and 5 seal finalists. All of the flag finalists contain a star shape and use blue as one of the primary colors. Vexillologists, those who study flag design, suggest that simple designs with 2 or 3 basic colors that use meaningful symbols are best. 4 of the 5 seal finalists also highlight a star shape, while 1 features Minnesota's state bird, the loon. The commission has until January 1st to certify its adopted designs in a report to the legislature and the governor. At the turn of the 20th century, when the current Minnesota State Capitol opened to the public, about a quarter of Minnesotans hailed from Germany. You'll find a tribute to that heritage in the north wing of the Capitol's basement. The State Capitol Rathskeller is sort of a time capsule from 1905 when the building was built. What is the history of this impressive basement room?
Yeah, this is a really significant part of Cass Gilbert's visioning of these spaces. And it's unique because it's a German Rathskeller, so it's patterned after something you would find in a German public hall. The tradition is they debate upstairs, and then at the end of the day, they come down, have a few drinks, talk to each other, so there's a camaraderie and a fellowship. So it's kind of a place to unwind after a busy day. So there's that, the German immigration, that was our largest immigration group, has been throughout our history of a state. And so that is a nice nod to the German heritage, but also to kind of impart that tradition of a German public space and a place to gather below ground.
The combination of anti-German sentiment and prohibition had a big effect on the Rathskeller. What happened?
That really was a key event in how you would have seen this building, and this space in particular, after World War I began. So it was kind of a double whammy, a two-edged sword for the Rathskeller, because it has a lot of drinking slogans written in German. So now we're fighting a war against Germany. Plus there was a lot of strong prohibition forces. So you have German drinking slogans, which is not a good combination for what people saw as a place to bring the public down to or be a part of that establishment. So this entire ceiling, all the walls were whitewashed. Everything was painted white. And that was the tradition for many, many years. There was a time in the 30s when Governor Theodore Christensen painted some of the slogans back in. And then we're not sure why that got covered up again a few years after that. And it wasn't until we did the restoration of the space in 1999 that we brought back all the original stencils, all the drinking slogans again, to give you a sense of what it would have appeared like in 1905.
How extensive was the research that needed to be done to bring it back to its original intent?
Yeah, we did a lot of research just to understand the space a lot more. That's where we never really found any evidence to say that this was, a governor's edict because of the war, World War I. Most of the documentation we see with letters to the governor, women's auxiliary groups, was to kind of advocate for the prohibition, to remove the drinking slogans. But it's a combination of both. I think we can understand that's kind of the sentiment of America at that time.
Why should visitors to the Capitol come see the Rathskeller?
Well, as I said before, it's a really neat space. It's something you don't necessarily expect to see in the state capitol. And once again, since it's been restored, 1999 it reopened in 2000. It's a full service, cafeteria again, so you can
during
eat
the
here.
legislative session.
During the legislative session, you can come down here and eat. And then it's also just a beautiful place to see that decoration. And it's a combination of an American Rathskeller and a German Rathskeller, because you have traditionally in a Rathskeller in Germany, you might have German eagles. Well, here we have eagles that are American eagles instead of a German eagle. And then you also have two dates that are important parts of our state's history: 1849, which is the year we became a territory; 1858, we became the 32nd state. So those dates were part of that original stencil. And so there's insets as you walk through and see this restored space. We were able to preserve some of the original stencil, and so that's inset against the wall, and there's a new layer of plaster on the edges of that or above that has the new stencil. But throughout this space you can see these really neat examples of what it looked like in 1905. The public is welcome to come down here. We have a nice little exhibit that Minnesota Historical Society put together, a little display to explain a little bit more of the history, and you can see some of what happened to this space. And you also discover there were 22 layers of paint on top of the original art. So there was a lot of overpainting and painting of the ceiling over time.
And since the renovation in 2017, there is overflow space now by the governor's dining room and the judicial dining room. Is that right?
Yeah, there's additional eating space, and that's really a nice addition to the public access and usability of this space. This can be a noisy space when there's a lot of people here. It's a neat historic space to have lunch. But also, if you want a little bit more quieter conversation or overflow, there's a kind of an adjunct space down the hallway that's another neat space with reproductions of the furniture that was there, the tables and the chairs, some television, so if you want to watch the committees or the session, you can kind of keep up to date with that. So as part of the restoration project, it's a really important part of what we do here and how the public can use the spaces.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.